What's the darkest secret you found out about a family member relative? My father tried to kill my mother while she was pregnant with me. 2 years ago I found out that my dad had a wife before my mom and she died in a freak accident on their wedding night. Edited. She was sleepwalking and fell to her death over the balcony if anyone was wondering. Stepfather was cheating on mother. Didn't find out because he was caught cheating. Found out because he and his mistress were drunk. Got in a fight. And he punched her so hard that she fell over and died. Found out about the whole thing during the investigation. The trial. And the conviction. Was weird to have a lawyer want to call 12-year-old me to stand to defend the character of a man I already had very little interaction and a fear of. And that was before the manslaughter charge. I found out that my grandfather's first wife, before my grandma, died of botulism from eating some tomatoes she had canned at home. She could have been saved. But he refused to take her to the doctor because the botulism was her fault. He let her die to teach her a lesson. Edit. They had 2 kids he left motherless. A few years before he passed, my dad and I had a long heart-to-heart. At the end of which, he told me he wasn't the one to first sleep with my mom on their honeymoon. He caught her in bed with her cousin, with which she had been in love for a long time. He spoke with their pastor, who told him to forgive and forget. That worked. Until 6 years later, when he caught her again, with the same cousin. He told me he wanted to leave with me but ultimately decided to stay. Because he wanted me to have a family. With all that happened in my childhood. And to him, workaholic. Diabetes. Heart attack. I wish he'd left and be happy instead. There is strong debate in our family as to whether my aunt fell out of the window of her flat. Whether she jumped or was pushed. She survived. But with brain damage. And says she can't remember. I found out from my dad that one of my cousins isn't related to anyone in the family. My aunt and her mother used to work at a hospital maternity ward and apparently a woman came in one day and gave birth to him and then left the next day without him. My aunt decided to adopt him. But a few months later the woman showed up again asking where he was. They both lied that he was given up and didn't have a clue where he was. They still haven't told my cousin anything. My great uncle is a rapist that prefers underage family members. I don't know how many people actually know. But my grandparents certainly do along with his victims, my mom, aunt. And I know at least a few of their cousins but I'm not sure which. But then he found Jesus again so we all have to forgive him and pretend nothing happened? It was before I was born but that's the basic runaround I've gotten from my grandparents. They don't ever actually acknowledge it, just that Tony did bad things but he found God. I eventually put 2 and 2 together about my mom's history or sexual assault and her making sure that me and my female cousins were never left alone with him. And now that I'm in my 20s that duty has been passed down to me at every family gathering. It's like an unspoken rule that you can't say why. Just the warning. Don't leave your daughters alone with him. I'm tired of it though. Tired of shooing little girls away and having to pretend like it's normal. Scooping toddlers out of a predator's arms and acting like everything's fine and I'm just baby crazy. When this is all over, I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. The next time I have to around him I'm taking children right back to their parents with the full freaking story of why it's dangerous. I'm tired of having to protect a rapist to keep peace. Not really dark at all. But surprising. My mild-mannered Buddhist lawyer uncle was international MR. Leather's Leather Daddy's Boy of the Year sometime in the late 80s. My dad told me that, before my mom and dad broke up, he hadn't been happy with her for several years. My mother even had a miscarriage at one point, which destroyed the both of them. But he couldn't leave her, because he was afraid that she would hurt or even kill herself. So his only thought was to have a kid with her, so that motherly instinct would hopefully prevent her from killing herself. My mother supposedly has a fraternal twin. My grandmother couldn't handle the thought of 2 kids, so she gave the male child away to someone she knew that was moving away. She asked my great-grandmother about it and she knew the boy's name but not where they moved to or who he was living with. My mom actually had met him once but didn't know who he actually was. My grandmother denies it ever happened and my grandfather felt that surely they'd have had to tell me. I doubt they would have though. When she was pregnant with me, my mom asked my great-grandmother what my middle name should be. My middle name is actually his middle name. Edit, fraternal twins. Not paternal twins. My biological grandfather threatened to kill my grandmother while she was very young and pregnant with my uncle. Long story short, he was engaged to someone else. My grandmother became a nervous wreck while pregnant and wouldn't leave the house and he used to throw bricks through the window. Eventually she told some of her friends about what he'd threatened to do to her. Shortly after that he went missing. Never to be seen or heard from again. We always kind of laughed and joked that one of her friends must have threatened him or ran him out of town. We would even go as far to say someone might have killed him for her. It wasn't until we were going through her boxes of photos and love letters we realized she was actually friends with the Cray twins. My uncle didn't have an aneurysm stroke spontaneously. Sorry. I'm not a doctor, he deliberately stopped taking his blood thinners. Dude was 63 with a wife, 4 kids and 15 grandkids. The oldest of which was 13 and the youngest was not even a year. He was just done. His wife doesn't know. His kids don't know. I only know cause I overheard the family doctor telling my dad. As far as I know, only myself, the doctor, and my dad know. I found out that my great-grandpa got away with murder. He thought that my great-grandma was cheating on him with her dentist, so he went into his office and shot him. He got away with it too and they didn't find out that he did it until he told everybody before he died. Edit, since a lot of people are asking if she actually cheated on him. I don't know. But considering he was an ass that she was afraid to leave and he ended up being capable of murder. Probably. My great uncle was murdered along with his wife. The murder suspect was run down and got stuck in a swamp. Shot himself in the head. The strange particulars. My uncle, his wife, and the murderer were all deaf mute. The murderer was renting a room from them. This happened in the 40s. And no one ever found the motive. A few years ago, I took a DNA test and found that I had cousins who had descended from the murderer's wife. Turns out my great uncle was cuckolding him. One of my aunts raised another aunt's baby as her own. My mom had 4 sisters and a brother, all of whom got married and had kids. So I have around 20 cousins. Unfortunately 3 of my aunts got breast cancer in their 30s. All 3 recovered. But years later the youngest, Maria, got it again and got it worse. Maria needed a bone marrow transplant. All her sisters and children got tested, but no one matched. The family then revealed that Maria had had a teenage pregnancy. Her first child was actually my cousin John, who had been adopted and raised by my oldest aunt as her second child. None of the cousins knew about this, including John and his revealed to be adoptive siblings. John was asked to get tested and was a match. So he agreed to donate bone marrow to his birth mom, Maria. John was in his late 20s at the time and had had very little contact with Maria over his life. So he's pretty cool. The transplant took, but Maria eventually succumbed a year or so later. Edit, my family is very aware of the risks of breast cancer affecting any of us. Luckily none of my female, or male, cousins have gotten it. We are all still vigilant and self-check ourselves regularly. My mom and dad decided to take in my 3 cousins because their mom got into a horrible car accident. 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls were 6 and 10. The boy 12. Fast forward to when the 6-year-old girl is 14 years old and is asked about birth control. She starts sobbing, saying her brother, the then 12 years old, took her virginity when she was 6 and that it continued until she was about 13. We had no clue. Both of my mother's parents had affairs without the other's knowledge. My grandmother had Parkinson's, and in one of her confused states she told my grandfather that she had an affair. Suffice to say, my grandfather was not happy and put her in a home. He then started talking to my mother, trying to figure out when it could have happened. He speculated that it happened around the same time he was having his affair, which was around 1966. My mother was shocked. She was born in 1967. So my mother may or may not be related to the man she believed to be her father. Edit, phrasing. My step-grandfather had a completely hidden life in Australia before he met my grandmother. He had a family and kids in Australia, and faked his death by driving his car off a cliff, then moving to America. His kids thought he was dead until my grandmother found out about them and reached out years later. His son actually became a famous comedian over there, and from what I know has a joke he does at his shows about his father faking his death to disconnect from them. Edit, yes, it's Greg Fleet. I recently found out that my grandmother committed suicide as a result of the sexual abuse she received from her grandfather as a child, aged 8-14. Apparently her mother and many of her relatives were compliant with it and would even send her to his house for week-long visits where she would sleep in his bed. A relative tried to poison one of their guests. Once I learned about it, it finally sealed the deal for me and forever changed my view on them. They were bonkers anyway, but good lord, that's too much. My uncle's family claimed he had polio instead of a hereditary crippling disease. His wife figured it out when she went to their family reunion. She already had one child and was pregnant with another. My grandmother used to kidnap and sell young girls in Mexico back in the 50s and 60s. She would sell them to ranchers to presumably be wives and or hanky-panky slaves. She was not a good person at all. I found out that my great-grandpa wasn't actually my great-grandpa because my great-grandma had my grandma, her daughter, with a famous boxer who was extremely abusive. She divorced him after having kids with him and met my great-grandpa while she was supervising the manufacturing of B-25 bombers during WW2. My mom and I are the only ones, besides my grandparents, that know the true story. Edit, holy shit. I was not expecting this to blow up like it did. If anyone wants to hear more, I'd be willing to go more in depth. Reddit 2. I talked to my mom about the story and turns out that my great-grandma's first husband, the boxer, died, and that she wore a red dress to his funeral. My parents told us they were married in secret until they found out my mom was expecting, and then they told their families. It later came to light that they married on the day they found out my mom was pregnant and lied to their parents and us, but that wasn't the doozy. My father was an only child and his parents absolutely idolized him. They were very strict Catholics and very strict with my dad, never allowing him to play sports because they feared losing him or whatnot. My paternal grandmother had like 5 miscarriages. Anyway, after my dad's parents passed, he was going through their documents and he learned they had to get married too. Their wedding license was dated 2 months after the date he had always been told. I know it's not a very dark secret, just a very Catholic secret in a very Catholic family. My grandfather, who I never met, was in a cult and him and his friends sexually abused my father and uncles. The weird thing is my father gave me his first name for my middle name. I've always thought it was the Stockholm Syndrome that made my father name me after his pervert and demented dad. I am legally changing my name on my next birthday. My father has never been a normal person. Supposedly, according to my uncle, he got the worst of the abuse, which I accredit to his messed up childhood. That my grandfather murdered his own brother to inherit his money. Edit. It's kinda funny that I received wholesome awards talking about how my grandfather was a murderer, lol. A cousin confided in me a month ago that she was molested by my grandfather when we were kids. She even told me that I was there with her when this was happening and I somehow don't remember anything about it. I hope he's burning in hell for it. My dad has a brother who I've never met and I didn't even know about his existence until a few years ago. I asked my parents why nobody from the family talks about him and why haven't they invite him to us, but they said just because. And then we had other relatives over at our house and I heard them talking about him, and it turns out the guy's a criminal and he spent almost all his life in prison, but the worst thing he did is that he was molesting his own daughter, or at least he was accused with it, but my mother and also the half of the extended family believes till this day that his daughter just made it up for attention.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.